Okay, I got my figure primed and it's ready to go. Um, Now, as you can see here in the background, I have three flesh color paints, and I always start with the face and the hands. And I think this is basically the reason why a lot of people don't do figures with their model, is because they're afraid they're going to get their faces wrong. Well, it's basically um, you give it a base coat, and then once it's dry, you give it a wash, which falls into all the recesses so you can give it a little bit of depth. And then you turn around with the dry brush of the lighter color to pick out the highlights, and you leave it be. Some people like to go a little bit further and pick out their eyes and all their little fingernails and put eyebrows on them and all that stuff. But when you think about it, if you was to hold up any scale, if you were doing 72, 64, 135 or 132, if you was to hold that figure up in your fingers and backed off a person standing in the street, how much detail of that person are you going to be able to see matching that scale? Now, if they're the larger figures like the 1/16 to the 1/6 scales, which are pretty large, then yeah, you're going to see a whole lot of that. But at these smaller scales, you give a little sense of depth by showing a little shadow and some highlight, and all the very detailed stuff really doesn't matter, because in the real world, as you're looking at somebody that far away, you're not going to see a whole hell of a lot of that. But as it goes, we'll get started and we'll paint their face. We'll start with a base coat. Let's see. This is the base. So basically, this is a life color. This is a life color acrylic paint, which I personally like acrylic paints. They're a whole lot easier on cleanup. They don't smell. And if you want to thin them a little bit, all you do is add a little water. Now, I keep a little water next to me so I can take the paint and I can just dab a little paint and dab a little water to get it the consistency I like. I don't like it real thick, because what happens is you end up piling the paint on, and you don't want to pile the paint on. So let's see if we can get a little closer here to the camera, and we'll do a little painting here, and you'll see how he just comes to life as we add the colors to him. I mean, this guy looks like he's just mesmerized with whatever he's shooting at. So we'll see if we can bring a little expression to this face here. Just dab a little paint, and I like to get just a little touch of water just to spread it out. And you think about it, the thinner the paint is, the faster it dries. So it works out well that way. And the good thing about paint is, if you mess it up, you can always paint over it. So, and as far as being meticulous in catching everything in the lines, say you're doing his belt straps or whatever, if you're not perfect in it, well, it's no big deal, because usually when you do a wash, it'll cover all your imperfections up anyway. So we do his face and his hands here, and then we'll we can go ahead and finish those, or we can go ahead and start on his uniform and get the basics done, which I'll probably just do the basics. I'll get him all painted up and then we'll go back and give them the washes and then the highlights. So, but Life Color here makes a real good flesh tone set, and I enjoy it. I've used it on several of my figure models, and it has worked out really well. But everybody has their own preferences as to what kind of paints they like to use. If you like to use enamel paints, well, I'll give you this. If you decide you're going to use a thinner based wash over enamel paint, then make sure that you seal your model before you put that wash on there, because it'll break up the first layer of paint. And I don't know if you guys can tell, but that is really, you can really start to pick out the detail seeing it with just that one coat of paint on there. Now we'll add washes and highlights to it, and you'll see how much better it brings it all out. Alright, so with that said, now we'll go ahead and start picking out his uniform. The uniform, I think, well, it's a tannish color, but I think this olive drab, the red tone from Life Color, looks really close. And I'll use like a burnt umber wash, or I may even use one of these flesh tone washes as kind of a brown look, and then I'll go back and I'll highlight it with some olive drab, the yellow tone, which it looks pretty close to the picture I have here. So we'll go ahead and we'll start picking out his uniform, which I failed to add a little water here, so we haven't gotten too far. We'll go ahead and add that. But as we pick this uniform out, when you get to their hands and their neckline, just take your time. But if you don't get it perfect, it's all right, because like I said, when you do the wash, it usually covers up all the little flaws, and you come out with a pretty convincing figure. And that uniform was, I see a lot of the old movies with blue jeans and t-shirts, but these guys got long sleeve, look like khaki shirts and pants on, so we'll just paint them like the reference shows, and we'll go from there. So as we paint the uniform, another hint, as you're painting your figures, I like to try and keep my hands touching together. That way, if one moves, then they both move together. So it makes it a heck of a lot easier for control, instead of trying to hold this in one hand and paint over here. I always just like to touch my hands together. That way that I have a little thyroid issue, and I get to shaking every once in a while, and it helps. It helps a whole lot. So we'll just go ahead and finish painting his uniform. It's kind of weird doing this in front of this little camera, but anyway, we're going to make the best of it. Yeah, it's going on real nice. This Life Color makes some really decent paints. If you guys don't don't haven't tried any, well, I'm telling you what, you really need to, because um, it dries fast, it covers really good, and it doesn't ruin the detail because it's fairly on the thin side. But I like to add a little water to it too, just to give me a little bit more control. And plus, I don't like the paints real heavy anyway. To me, when you're doing figures, if you look at the old pair of breeches that you wear out um, all over the place, or some of your older shirts that you work in, you notice the colors aren't as consistent as they were when they were new. And I figured these guys is in wartime. Probably your uniforms have seen a pretty good day or two of service. So, as it goes, I don't think it's really, to get a convincing figure, um, I don't think it's all that important to get it pristine, all a perfect coat, especially when you're talking about wartime uniforms. So, but as you take a look here, just in that short amount of time, oh, knocked him over. I've fallen and I can't get up. But anyway, maybe I need to darken my light source a little bit. Anyway, there's base coat on most of his uniform. With all we have left now is the life vest and his shoes, and of course the helmet will be regular olive drab. And but as far as the reference goes, when you look at the reference, that looks pretty close so far, eh? Once we give them a wash and a highlight, they ought to turn out pretty convincing. So let's move on to his life jacket, which I think is probably, it looks like to me, a blue-gray color, like a dark navy blue-gray. Let's see what I have. Let's see. This might not be it. If it's not, we give it a wash and some highlights. I think it'll be just fine. It looks like it's a blue to me, so we'll go with this. Forget to reposition the camera when I do this, but like I said, you just kind of take your time, like you do when you're painting other things. You've painted one thing and you want to paint next to it. You just try to keep it in the area you want to keep the paint, but you know, I know it always doesn't work out in the best interest, so we'll we'll just say that glad it's paint and you can paint over it. I mean, that looks pretty convincing, right? All right, well, I'll finish painting this and we'll go on to giving a wash and then the highlights.